Most arguments don't fail because the conclusion is obviously wrong. They fail because something important was assumed instead of explained. And once you notice these hidden assumptions, arguments can start to look very different. Every argument depends on premises, the things that must be true for a conclusion to follow. Sometimes those premises are stated clearly, but very often they are left unstated. These are what philosophers call hidden assumptions. They're the pieces of reasoning that an argument quietly relies on without actually saying out loud. Let's take an argument you sometimes hear in discussions about gender. Someone might say, if gender identity were real, we would be able to measure it objectively. Since they believe gender identity can't be measured that way, they conclude gender identity is not real. It might sound logical at first, but notice what the argument assumes. The reasoning depends on the hidden premise that everything real must be measurable in the same way physical traits are. But that assumption itself isn't argued for. It's simply taken for granted. And once you notice that, this debate shifts, because now the question becomes whether that assumption is actually true. Many things we consider real aren't directly measurable in the same way physical traits are. Things like pain, emotions, personal identity, or psychological experiences. We can study them and gather evidence about them, but they aren't measurable in the same way we measure height or blood pressure. So if the argument depends on the idea that only directly measurable things are real, it's relying on a premise far from obvious. This doesn't automatically prove the original claim wrong, but it does show that the argument skips an important step. Instead of demonstrating the assumption, it quietly builds the conclusion on top of it. And that's something hidden assumptions often do. They make arguments feel stronger than they actually are because part of the reasoning stays invisible. One useful question you can ask when hearing any argument is this: what would have to be true for this reasoning to work? That question often reveals assumptions that were never discussed. And once those assumptions are visible, it becomes much easier to evaluate whether the argument really holds up. Because sometimes the key to understanding a debate isn't the conclusion someone reaches, it's the assumptions that help them get there.